when we think about innovation and we think about paradigmic change in technology, you think in the age of ChatGPT and so on, you think about Silicon Valley, you think about the West more broadly, that kind of thing. But actually in this country, you've had a digital revolution of a kind that's never been seen before, on a scale that's never been seen before over the last 10 years. It is unique, not just because of its size, scale, and what it does, but because, unlike in the West, it's not driven by the private sector, it's been enabled by the state and by public institutions. You think about UPI, you saw the video yesterday of the German minister with UPI, which everybody was talking about. UPI is run by a non-profit institution, which is a partnership between the RBI and several private sector banks. Now that kind of thing you don't have in Germany, you don't have in the US, you don't have other places. That's why over 70 countries are now looking at taking on India Stack and UPI and so on. But the point I want to make is this decade, across the last 10 years, across two different, totally ideologically opposite political regimes, and from 2014 onwards in particular, you've had the creation of the making of this decade, the decade of tech, which we are now leading into, is a term that Narendra Modi used 2 years ago from the Red Fort in his Independence Day speech. But what this means is that you've seen a complete retooling of the plumbing of our society in multiple ways. If you look at the level of direct benefit transfers, that has changed politics, it's changed the economy, it's changed how we deal with, how the government deals with, engages with the poor, right? If you look at money, UPI has changed the hinges of the economy in significant ways. Look at the latest numbers, 73% of all non-cash retail transactions are now UPI. Last numbers were 14,089,315 crores worth of UPI transactions. That was just a couple of months back. You look at DigiLocker. You look at something like financial inclusion. India has brought almost 500 million people into the formal banking sector in the last 10 years. That is absolutely unprecedented. I think we don't talk about it enough. I think we are so used, you can travel from here to Gorakhpur and you will not need to spend a single paisa of money. Your phone is enough. And it's linked, it's interoperable. In the West, when you do these transactions, it's a mobile wallet to a mobile wallet. It's a bank card to a bank card. Today, I can use Paytm, you will be using something else. I can still pay you money and I can take it from my bank directly. That you can't do in any other country in the world. And I think we should talk about our own story and the scale of this.
Okay. We'll talk about how government is also using it now with Dr. Tina, who works very closely with government. But when you talk about government involvement in this, it often becomes political. The BJP says it's because of our steps that the digital revolution has started. The Congress says that Rajiv Gandhi was the one who was actually bringing about this IT revolution from that time. So what is your view on the politics of it, of course, Dr. Tina? But coming back to government, how is government using technology to help the poor today?
So rightly said, Nalin, government is also, it's a nation building process. When you have digital, the banking system, then you are not leaving any stone unturned for the, for that money to come to the government machinery, and that goes for people's welfare, that we all know. Though we run, parallel economy, and that's how we fail, but we are, sooner or later, we are trying to adopt these policies. Anyways, coming back to your question now. Government is using every possible tool to reach out to people and give them what they deserve with their tax, because they're taxpayers and they're the people who really need something in their pockets, which is saving their time, which is saving their energy, which is giving them, I'll tell you, sitting at home, I can do my virtual meetings. I am sitting at home doing other things, but today I can do banking on my phone. I don't have to, go for Flywire transaction. My daughter studies in London, and I don't have to go to bank and queue up in the line and do those things. But government is not just MSME, not just as advisor of MSME. I would say that government in every department, government is trying to even with the tenders, L-word tenders, other tenders, government is trying to cope up with every possible facility which can be delivered to the people. Also, we are not shying away from picking up that from the West, because we know that there are developed countries, and we are taking some of the technologies from from other countries. But yes, we believe in Make in India. Make in India is doing wonderful job. RuPay is doing wonderful job. Bhim app is doing wonderful job. I think the kind of innovation we've seen in recent times, I think this full decade has changed. I cannot compare this last 5 years. If anybody in this room can probably, correct me if I'm wrong. Last 5 years in financial services cannot beat. I mean, there's no other era I have seen growing this much. One reason could be very easily we can pick up and say that, we are in, the century is different. We are in, we are growing, we are developing, we are being more promised with the people. But that's not true. It's government's willpower to deliver. There are multiple other things where government can take vote. And I'll tell you honestly speaking, when you talk about Congress and BJP, I represent BJP as well. I would say most of these state governments doesn't get vote on their work. You're all media people. That's true. But then government is delivering. Government has to deliver. And one point I would like to say...
So you're saying technology, digital revolution, all of this will not work in elections?
I am not saying that. I am saying that, working for people is the primary responsibility of a government, of a public representative, whether it's nominated or elected. That's their responsibility. Depends how visionary they are,
okay,
how they want to be perceived in coming years.
Okay.
Whether they fight election, they win election, they don't win election. It's, at times it's... anti-incumbency after a few tenures, all of that. Do you think that government should stop working, thinking on those lines?
Okay.
That, this is a third tenure, we might not win, let's not do anything, sit at home, relax?
Yes. I'll come back to you. I'll come back to you also now on industry, which is another area particularly the MSME one. But I want to get in Hindol here. On of course, this belief that this is India's tech age. Is that correct? Or was there something coming? Interestingly, you also, Hindol, are working on a book which is looking back a bit, isn't it? Particularly on the technology space in India.
So there's no doubt that this is India's decade as far as the kind of technologies we are seeing now being applied compared to any other country. There's no doubt about that. And many of these technologies have been spoken of in this panel too. UPI and Aadhaar and the digital stack and so on and so forth. Indo-futurism, which is the conceptual framework in which I'm working, looks at a much larger, broader sweep of Indian history. And it argues from the Harappan age onwards, in every millennia, India was always at the forefront of technological innovation. In fact, even under colonial rule, some of the most interesting scientific work was actually done in India. And I would say colonial rule was one of the worst phases. But even before that, even if you want to take a different age, the early medieval period, when northern India especially was really being brutalized by invasions, even at a time like that, there were many things, whether it's in water conservation, whether it's in understanding weather patterns, whether it's in building, architecture. A lot of the most innovative ideas came from India. So Indian civilization, if you take a long sweep of Indian civilization was always at the forefront of adopting technology. Adopting and adapting technology. Let me give you one example which many people have forgotten. If you go to Damascus today, they talk about the Damascus sword. the great sword of Saladin, so to speak, right? And anybody who knows that history knows how important the symbol of that sword is in the crusade history. What was the sword of Saladin made of? It was made of something called Damascus steel. Damascus steel didn't come from Damascus. Damascus steel came from India. It was in India known as wood steel. Wood steel, the composition of wood steel, we cannot make that kind of steel even today in India. It was hand beaten at a particular level which had tensile strength that cannot be matched by anything that we have today. It was a sword, it was created, it was material that could create weapons like the sword of Saladin, so to speak, where a sword could completely be bent into half and would, open up, spring up effortlessly, and yet have the ability to cut a person in half effortlessly. That technology we don't have even today. So metallurgy, right? Metallurgy, the West has made this idea of alchemy very famous. You touch something and it turns to gold. Where did the first work of alchemy really, and of course we've lost that, we've lost all those, technologies. Where did that work first happen? In India. You see, many of the things that today we feel come from the Arab world actually come from India.
That's quite interesting. So you're saying it's not new, because now we're talking about innovations like UPI, which are going to the world. The German, dignitary that Nalin mentioned. We're also talking about now about the Middle East also taking on board
so
UPI.
Look at the interesting thing. Once boot steel became Damascus steel, today, for all you know, UPI would be adopted across the Gulf nations in the West, adopted for public health, public good. Again, technology from India for public good being adopted around the world.
Nalin, you wanted to comment?
I wanted to make 2 points here, and I was fascinated by Hindol's. I want to make 2 points here, and I was fascinated by Hindol's deep dive into Damascus steel and the vicissitudes of Indian history. 2 things. One, when we say that the Indian state has changed, is this hyperbole or what does it really mean? And I want to make a very clear point. For a very large amount of time, there's been a problem of a digital divide in India. So it's always been कि यार ये तो अमीर लोग का ना, मतलब how will it affect the poor? Simple thing. The creation of the combination of a revolution of cheap mobile phones, cheap data, and a digital unique ID system enabled the decade and the digital revolution. And I'll give you some numbers to say what I'm saying. Aadhaar was not invented by this government. It was set up by the Manmohan Singh government. In fact, when Modi comes to power, and this is a question I put to the Prime Minister, because the BJP and Mr. Modi in particular campaigned against Aadhaar, against Nandan Nilekani in South Bangalore in particular. So when Mr. Modi comes to power in 2014, for the first couple of months, there is a question mark over Aadhaar. Not just because of the BJP's position at that point of time, but also because Aadhaar was stuck between 2 ministries in the Congress, between Mr. Chidambaram and Mr. Pranab Mukherjee's ministry. So at that point, there is a pivotal meeting that happens in July, early July of 2014, between Nandan Nilekani and the Prime Minister. And by the way, Modi had personally campaigned against Nandan Nilekani as a Congress candidate in South Bangalore, and specifically talked about Aadhaar. And in that meeting, Mr. Modi sees, and I asked this question to him, and he said, look, I had specific objections to Aadhaar, which I had communicated to Nandan even when I was Chief Minister of Gujarat, from my experience. I said, I'm not a techie, I didn't know the solution, but I could tell you what the issues on the ground will be. By this time, a lot of these issues were resolved, some of them, but in that meeting, a political decision is taken by the Prime Minister that this is what we will do. So, because that time there was a fight between the Home Ministry and the Finance Ministry, like who will control this? A decision is taken, Aadhaar is scaled, the Prime Minister puts his entire political might behind it, and it's scaled up. The result is this. I'll give you the numbers, they're really mind-boggling. In 2013-14, and that includes the Manmohan Singh period, there were 28 schemes which were direct benefit transfer linked. There were 10.8 crore beneficiaries, and 7,367 crores of money was spent. Now, in the 14 years since, in 22-23, if you look at the number of schemes has gone up by 11x to about 312. You look at the number of people, that's gone up by 8x to about 92.3 crore. If you look at the amount of money, that's gone up by 110x to about from 7,367 crore to about 8.5 lakh crore. Okay? Now, this is very important because for every government in this country has spent money on the poor. The problem is the Indian state is often not known how to find the poor. The money goes in corruption. You know, Rajiv Gandhi had famously said, for every rupee that goes, only 15 paisa reaches the poor. Direct benefit transfers cut through all of that. Now, it has to be improved. Now, this has changed the nature of the Indian state. And this is not just for BJP, it's for non-BJP states also. Look at Karnataka now. Look at Raitu Bandhu in Telangana. This is across the board. And this, even in America, if you get, Hindol has lived in the US, if you're on welfare dole, you'll get it in a check, which you can check there later. Look at what this has done to this has saved something like 25 lakh crores. And the amount of money that has been spent on spending, which is going directly into people's
So
pockets.
that's an example that it's not just happened, which is beneficial for the elite, but the masses have been benefited. Just quickly talking about the industry before I close with Hindol, Tina ji, on how it's enabled industry, digital technology, and how particularly the MSME sector, which is often regarded as India's backbone of our industry.
Absolutely. Well, I would like to, I proudly mention that, it's MSME is one of the ministry which is under PM's, amongst 5 ministry, and it's under the observation, and there are multiple, even in interim budget, we got the budget. So I will say that, if you go on MSME website now, you'll find all hyperlinks with wonderful secretary now. The secretary has recently changed. People who are coming in MSME has done wonderful job. We have a MOU with SEDB now. SEDB is doing phenomenal work when it comes to technology. SEDB is, the right context which he's putting it here is the reaching out to masses. The number you quoted before 2014, we need to minus those which was, without DBT, because that was the Aadhaar was giving money to somebody else, right? So there were people in that gap. But DBT has changed everything. So you need technology, but you need extension of technology with betterment. And I think that's what MSME has been giving. If you, I'll tell you today, Paisa Bazaar, Credit Enable, Credit Line, there are multiple financial institutions, NBFCs, have taken MSME. Government has approached them. NBFC banks, multiple financial institutions are giving you MSME loans on a call. It's just a call away. I was in a conclave yesterday, in Dehradun, and there was no single question from the, hall that we can't reach to bank. No one is giving us, loan. We have no idea how to go with the process, papers. It's just a click away. You pick up your phone, write MSME loan for women, MSME loan for SC women, MSME loan for, for OBC women. You write Mudra, you write PMY.
Yes.
All of that. So I think we all use. I'm sorry. I just concluded.
Yes.
So sorry. So I don't think we have any more pretensions to
So that's proof enough. Yes.
That's a proof.
Okay.
There are thousands of MSM, thousands of financial inclusions.
Yes. I've run out of time. Hindol, I want to give the last word to you before we end on where we're headed. We've obviously got the Digital Data Protection Act now because safeguards are needed. What happens with increased use of technology and social media access.
I'm glad you mentioned the Digital Data Protection Act because look at how neatly it turns out that it connects to our own history, which of course we don't know. That's a different story. There is a town in England called Paisley. How did it get the name Paisley? It got the name Paisley because about 100 years before it became Paisley, there was a shawl that traveled from Kashmir, where Kashmiris artisans used to make, the boota or the booty as we would call it. That shawl was given by an English general or a soldier to somebody in France. From there it went to the court of Napoleon, and Josephine began to wear shawls from Kashmir with the design of the boota or the booty. When it became a rage in the courts of Europe, those shawls went to England when the English aristocracy began. And Josephine, there are paintings of Josephine wearing those Bhuta shawls from Kashmir. When it went to England, the mills of Manchester tried for years to perfect that via machine. They failed for many years until they got it right, and then made it a low-cost, cheap substitute, and it began to sell in such numbers, not the same quality, but such numbers that the town was called Paisley. We didn't have the Data Protection Act at that time. We needed it then.
Okay, that's a good note to close on, and we've certainly enjoyed Hindol's examples today, which have substantiated his arguments, but no doubt it is truly India's tech age, and my thanks to all of our guests for joining us on this very topical session today. Thank you all very much.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.